could actually get away from everything for a little bit. So I apologize for the lighting. I don't know why the lights just went out. Anyway, so we hosted this workshop. We brought some people in, started sharing some ideas. That got a lot of people in Anchorage engaged with the idea of running experiments and trying to answer questions about how to raise money. And one of those was the Pick, Click, Give program. And we embedded an experiment, which I'm going to describe in a second, in the Pick, Click, Give program to look at basically why do people donate. Now, Marco, I don't know, can you share my screen, or can I share my screen, or how's that? So, all right, so I'll just.
There you go.
Okay, so if you can just go to the next slide. You know, the main thing that's come out of this is like a lot of fundraising has always just been on anecdotes, rules of thumb, why you do things the way that you do, just because we've always done it that way. One of the people who was working at Alaska Public Media at the time said, they sent out these letters because people in DC tell them these are the fundraising letters you should send out, but no one ever asked whether this particular letter was more effective than some other letter. So there's a lot of just anecdotes of how to do things, but no systematic study of why. Go ahead to the next slide. And I forgot to turn off the seat, so you can just load up everything that's on that slide. So when I talk about experiments, what I'm talking about is what some people would refer to as A/B testing. You might ask some people for money in one particular way, ask some people for money in a different way, and then you compare whether or not one particular ask is more effective than another. Often what I hear from people is like, oh, we do that all the time. Last year we raised money by asking them this question, and this year we changed it a little bit and we got more money. And that's not what we do, because that's not really effective A/B testing. Marco, if you could go to the next, just kind of hit next on these. Because if you do something on one campaign and then you change things in the next campaign and you get more money, you don't necessarily know whether that increase in money is because of the new techniques that you used, or if something else happened, like a recession kicks in, just larger permanent fund checks. So a lot of what we do, and like I'm going to use this Pick, Click, Give program study that we did as an example to kind of ground what we did. You have a control group that's sort of like status quo, business as usual, and then this other group within the same campaign, you vary the way that you ask them for money, and then we can compare the differences between them. So you can go ahead to the next slide, and just go ahead one more to the Pick, Click, Give stuff. So in 2014, what we did, this was a really neat study that looked at basically why people donate to charity. And there's broadly two reasons why people might give. One is because of the impact that your dollar could have, right? If there's somebody who's hungry and needs something to eat, and so you want to help that person. That's an altruistic act because you're benefiting other people. And there's nothing in it for you necessarily. So one reason that people might donate money to charity is for altruistic purposes, to help others. But there's more and more evidence suggesting that actually one of the primary motives for most people is what we call impure altruism, or a warm glow. That actually one of the reasons I donate to charity, sure, I do care about the impact that my dollar has, but I feel better about myself because now I know I'm a good person, for example, because I'm donating to charity. And so I feel good because I donated money. And that sort of sounds like a bit of a selfish motivation. And it's not entirely selfish, because there is still the impact that you're having. But the awareness of this difference between why people are giving in terms of impact to others versus benefits to self really can make a huge difference in a fundraising campaign. So you can go ahead to the next slide, Marco. And so what we did basically, it was a really simple study, but the outcomes were really strong. We sent out postcards statewide as part of the Pick, Click, Give program. Now, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the Pick, Click, Give program. In case there's a few of you who don't, every year Alaskans get a permanent fund dividend check. And Pick, Click, Give is a program that basically gives people the opportunity to donate some or all of that dividend check to one of the Alaskan nonprofits. We mailed out postcards to every household in the state. The households were divided into three categories. Actually, we mailed it to 2/3, correct me. 1/3 of the state basically got postcards that had a message that highlighted the benefits to others. And that postcard had no impact on giving whatsoever. The other message that we sent out highlighted benefits to self. We call it a warm glow. And people in that group were more likely to donate, they gave to more charities, and they shared more of their PFD. Marco, go ahead to the next one. So who's a participant in this? If any of you received a dividend check in 2014, you're actually in the data. The data are anonymized, so we can't actually find specific individuals, but we can still track like which postcard went to different households. We did this by zip code. So a third of the state did not get a postcard, a third got a Make Alaska Better postcard, and a third of the state got a Warm Your Heart postcard. Marco, go ahead to the next one, or whoever's doing it. And this is just showing you the picture of the postcards that people got. So again, a third of the state got no postcard, a third got this postcard on the left with a map of Alaska that said, Make Alaska Better for Everyone. A third got a message that said, Warm Your Heart, share your PFD. Now, to be honest with you, when we did this project, I was concerned that we weren't going to get much of an effect at all, because I tend to think of myself as somebody who takes these mailers and just puts them all into the trash because it's just one more piece of junk mail that you get. And in particular with Pick, Click, Give, there's so much other messaging going on by the individual nonprofits around the Pick, Click, Give program. There's a lot. This is in December, right when the permanent fund registration program kicks in. There's a lot of awareness and a lot of advertising, and so this was going to be just one more. The program was done in 2014. So this is going to be. I was concerned it was going to be just one more message that was kind of get lost in all, a little bit lost in all the noise. Go ahead to the next slide. But the results, you can just skip to the next slide. We don't need to talk about the data. And I'm just going to summarize the results. I have a lot more slides on this, but I figure I just want to hit to kind of the punchline. The results, that Warm Your Heart postcard had an amazing impact. People were 20% more likely to give. We got 6% more funding. People were supporting twice as many charities. The following year, that effect still persisted. And as just to give you an idea of the impact, we spent $40,000 on that campaign to print postcards to send out statewide. For the 1/3 of the state that got the benefits to the self postcard, we raised $500,000. So had we sent it to all three, statewide, we would have raised $1.5 million on a $40,000 investment, which is huge. But focusing on benefits to others really did not have much of an impact at all. And so, for punchlines, when you're thinking about fundraising campaigns, it's not to say that the impact that a program has is irrelevant. People do care about that, but linking it to something that's in it for the donor can really make a huge difference. If we go to the next slide, I'll give you two little anecdotes that kind of back this up. During that 2014 campaign, there was in March, sort of in the middle of the campaign, Pick, Click, Give offered a double your dividend promotion. It was basically a lottery, but it was a little bit unique in the sense that if you made a donation of any amount, you got a lottery ticket. So you couldn't buy any more than one lottery ticket. We're still working with this data, but what's looking like is March of 2014 basically got more donations than March of the prior years. But more importantly, we got a big increase in $25 donations. Now, why are $25 donations relevant? Because if you're trying to buy a lottery ticket and not necessarily donate to charity, $25 was the lowest amount that you could actually donate through the Pick, Click, Give program. So if you're going to buy one lottery ticket for self-interest, you make a $25 donation. So this would again suggest that people were making some of those donations in March of 2014, not necessarily because they wanted to donate to charity specifically, but because they saw there's a private benefit embedded within this. There was something in it for them. That same year in November of 2014, Alaska Public Media sent out two different letters asking people who had donated in the past to renew their memberships. One of them had a benefits to self message, support the programs you love like Car Talk and Morning Edition. The other message had something on the order of keeping Alaskans informed, kind of a benefits to others messaging to it. I don't have the specific amounts to this because we could never work out an arrangement where I could get the data to play around with it. But anecdotally, again, the benefits to self message raised a lot more money for them and got more responses than the benefits to others message. And so one thing for people when you think about fundraising campaigns. Again, it's not to say that what you do or what benefits an organization does are irrelevant, but being aware that that the donor sees himself or herself as a part of this and is getting something out of it beyond just giving money away, that can make a big difference. If we can go ahead to the next slide, I'll just give you a couple of other little bits of patterns in Pick, Click, Give, and then I'll wrap up and leave it for some discussion. These are some summary statistics. We have all the data from the beginning of the Pick, Click, Give program through 2019. And again, these are the factors that I have. I do not have people's income, which is probably one of the major drivers in some of the donation decisions. But some patterns that we see, which could be useful when you're thinking about campaigns. Older people are more likely to donate and donate more money. But again, older people tend to earn more money as well. So this could be an income effect more so than an age effect. Men tend to make larger donation amounts, but women are more likely to donate. Members of the armed forces in the military are a lot less likely to donate than civilians, and they also, members of the armed forces make smaller gifts. Civilians make larger gifts. But again, that does not mean members of the armed forces are not generous. There's a lot of other factors that go in. For starters, members of the military are not paid as much as the average population. So again, we may be looking at an income effect, not an armed forces effect. But when you're thinking about fundraising campaigns, being aware that like armed forces generally doesn't donate as much could be useful, either because you see it as a target audience, but then trying to understand what the barriers are for them or what their hesitation is. And my guess, I don't have the income data, but my guess is that it's largely driven by income, not a lack of generosity. This result surprised me a little bit. Those who are born in Alaska are less likely to donate, and they also make smaller gifts than people who were born outside of Alaska. I would have guessed the opposite. U.S. citizens tend to donate more and make larger gifts, but again, I'm speculating here. This could also be an income thing that's going on here. If we have a lot of people coming in to take work, for example, in the fish processing plants at at minimum wage, that would also explain it as well. Can we go to the next slide? Donor retention. This is obviously important. Not surprisingly, people who donated in the previous year tend to donate again, right? And so that's, keeping your warm list going is important. People who do not donate the previous year, you can see only 1% of the people who donated the prior year donated the next year. So getting people in can be a challenge, but once you get them in, then it's more effective in terms of then they're going to stay in. People who donated when they were a child, presumably this would be, you can imagine, parents sitting around with their kids and saying, you're getting a dividend check. Do you want to donate some of it to charity? 28% of the people who made a single donation as a child made a gift later when they were over 18. So this might suggest that cultivating a culture of giving could be very effective. So get people, basically create a habit when people are young. And the last point that I'll make is like in any given year, about 4 to 5% of permanent fund recipients make a donation. However, over the years, 8%, basically twice as many, who have gotten a permanent fund dividend make at least one donation. And what that means is there's people who come and go. And so the issue here is once they're in, figuring out ways to keep them in. And this result with the Pick, Click, Give program is consistent with, even if our numbers are very, very different because they're very different programs. A colleague of mine did a nationwide panel survey and tracked people over 20 years. And the general rule of thumb is that in any given year, about 60% of Americans donate. But over those 20 years, almost 90% donated at least once. And so that the 60-40 rule is, it takes a very static view of the world. Whereas if you take a more dynamic view over those 20 years and see that almost 90% of people are donating at least once in a while, then trying to figure out what's going on. And you can see that about half of those people are frequent donors. And then about 37%, more or less a third of the people kind of come and go. They donate some years. They might donate this year. They take a year off. They donate the next year. And so figuring out ways to maintain consistent relationship with these people who are switching on and off would be useful. And then the last thing I'll finish with for you guys is just some other work that people have done. If we can go to the next slide, I think this last one, yeah, just some other things on other studies that have come out that would be useful for people to keep in mind. Um, those first 3 points tie in with if you have an individual who's willing to give you a relatively large donation to kind of get a program going. One question is, well, what do you do with it? You could use it for a matching grant. One thing to keep in mind with matching grants, donors are more responsive to the existence of a match than they are to the size of the match. So a 1-to-1 match versus a 2-to-1 match versus a 3-to-1 match all yield about the same amounts. They raise more money than no matches, but the amount of the match doesn't matter. And so for a program that has a donor who's offering to do a matching grant, you might as well do 1-to-1 because you can spread that money much further than doing it 3-to-1. On the other hand, using that money for seed money, we have a donor who came in and is offering to fund the first 30% of it or 40% of the campaign. That tends to be more effective using that money for seeds than for matching. At the beginning, Mari touched on this idea of overhead. And there is a study out there that was published in Science a few years ago that looks at overhead. Donors, this is not surprising, donors, for whatever reason, don't like to give to overhead. And there's two tacks that you can take from a fundraising perspective. One is to educate donors on why overhead is important, because not someone has to do the administrative work that keeps a nonprofit going. But if you can convince 1 or 2 large donors of the importance of covering overhead, and then you can tell other donors all 100% of your dollars is going to go to program costs and have an impact. That can be very effective, and that's actually more effective than using those large donations for seed money or matching grants. Likewise, with those large gifts, signals of quality. So if you have a large donor who's recognized, like the Gates Foundation, that provides a signal of quality. People do respond to that. Particularly higher net worth individuals who are looking for signals of quality in programs that, if the Gates Foundation is going to donate to this, or if so-and-so is going to donate to this program, it must be worthwhile. And so that's important to keep in mind. And listen, Nina had asked me to look into where the research is on COVID and philanthropy. And I contacted some people that I knew were doing some work in that area and to try and see what I could dig up. And as of right now, there's not much that I can share with you guys on that. Most of those studies, not surprisingly, are underway. And the people that I spoke with, when I asked if is there anything that I could share, other than saying like giving generally is down, people are making smaller gifts on average, but that's not a surprise. There are people who are doing well, and there are people who are, through COVID, and are sensitive to the fact that there's some people who are not doing well. And so some of those people might be more willing to donate more than they have in the past, but there's still not a lot of evidence to show that is what's happening, at least not on a systematic basis. There's a lot more I could go into, but I don't want to take up all of the time for this session. I wanted to just kind of seed you guys with a few things to think about, and also just to kind of make you aware that when you are doing different fundraising campaigns, anytime you have an opportunity to think about embedding a little A/B testing or an experiment within that campaign is an opportunity to learn something. If you're going to send out letters asking for money, you might as well ask for two different types, do two different types of letters, and see whether or not one letter has more of an effect than the other letter. That's the only way you're going to learn, is by trying something new and just kind of doing it in a systematic way. So I'll stop there and turn the mic over to some of the others, and then hopefully there's plenty of time for questions and comments.
Great, thank you, Jim. I feel a little bit nervous because I know you're not the warm-up act, but we've already had one post in the chat that says, please take more time. This is great info. So we got to get the whole band on the stage at some point. But Jim, before we let you go, I do want to quickly ask, we had a question in the chat for the folks who got the Warm Your Heart postcard. Did they have a tendency to give to any particular types of organizations, or was it just kind of across the board?
I don't recall. I'd have to go back and take a look at that. I know I do have handy the distribution of what people are giving to across the board, but I don't have it subdivided by which postcard they got. So that would take a little bit of digging. So I apologize. I can't give you that one. I can tell you that broadly, most of the money that goes through Pick Click Give does go to like humanitarian causes, food bank, homeless shelters, and those types of things. The other one that tends to get a lot of money is the puppies and kittens. And a lot of the the animal welfare. The children tend to, when my mom and dad are sitting around saying, do you want to donate to charity? It's a lot easier for them to relate to saving some puppies than it is to say donating to the hospital.
Terrific, thank you. And I just learned that Stephanie's not able to join us today, so we're sorry to miss her input, but we are really grateful to have Tim with us. And so Tim, I wanted to first ask if there's anything that Jim just shared that really kind of stood out to you.
Yeah, a lot actually. It was really great, Jim. I appreciate it. And I think a lot of the things that Jim hit on, I can already, I've got 4 points down here that I can talk to a little bit later, but he's absolutely correct. It's sometimes it's trial and error, and I think on the corporate side of things, we do the same things. We're looking for metrics. We're looking more for the science and the anecdotes at some point, as well as the impact in programs. I did love the aspect of talking about the warm glow, because I think that's one thing that a lot of corporations and foundations are looking at. They want to be able to tell a story. And having those stories has more than just that, well, we gave because we did this. It allows a little bit more. I mean, it gets that warm glow. Benefits to self is always a good one, because the question is each corporate program has something that is looking at something specific, and they have their goals in mind, they have their values, and they want to be able to meet that measure as well. But the one that really hit home was signals of quality. I think you'll find a lot of corporations, I think you'll find some of the private foundations are looking to partner with other groups. In the state of Alaska, one of them would be the Rasmussen Foundation. I know that when I'm looking at certain things, I'm looking to see what other organizations have already partnered with those nonprofit organizations. So those are things that I believe corporations take into mind. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think I just hit on that once. Oh. Hey, Marion, you're on mute.
Doing so well for a minute there. So you're obviously Alaska Airlines is one data point in a large universe of corporate entities out there. But and as Jim noted, that a lot of the COVID analysis is still underway. But is there anything that you can share with us that Alaska Airlines as a corporation has sort of learned along the way, and whether it's shifted your thinking, and then also whether you're learning anything from colleagues in the field as well?
I think, it's still really early. I think the biggest thing that we've looked at is, it's the key word of 2020, I think 2021. Can you hear me better, by the way? I got a message, okay, good. It's pivot. I think everybody has done that. Every corporation has done that. Every nonprofit has done that. Every community has done it. And then it's pivoting and adapting. I think one of the biggest things. So for our part on Alaska Airlines, just real quick, we have really we have a couple different pots of giving, but one is the corporate side, which is usually vouchers, not as much as actual cash funds, but vouchers. We have our Lift Miles program, so we may be able to donate miles. Then we have our Alaska Airlines Foundation, which is our 501c nonprofit. Each of those has had to take those organizations that we work with in the past and watching them as they adapt. So on the corporate side, we've seen a lot of the nonprofits have to really move from large 400, 500 people gatherings where we would donate some tickets, they would be fundraising, to moving into this world, this new virtual world. I think it's been good, but it also has lacked the warm glow, as you would say. And so I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure that out. It's really early, and we're kind of in that weird stage now where, we're kind of, it's kind of like the airline industry. We went from moving 140,000 people a day to 4,000 people a day. The same thing with nonprofits, these large events. All right, now I'm having the same thing as Jim. I'm in one of those LED rooms too, that just as an automated thing. It has been dealing with, different, not insurmountable obstacles, but obstacles that kind of keep throwing up as we move from month to month. And I've watched the nonprofits do that. And we've partnered with them as best they can. I think the biggest thing was funding. And now that we've seen some funding come back in, through help through the federal government, it's helped to buffer. There's a cost way and a balance when I talk about fundraising. You're going to pay a certain amount to hold a fundraiser in, say, like a Hotel Captain Cook or a Sheraton at Janine or down in the Egan Center. as now that's no longer a barrier. Now you can actually do one of these online, but you lose that, that goal, that collective gathering of folks. So it's been interesting, and I think the data's still out on that when it comes to COVID. I think we're going to see a lot of what we saw last year, but I'm already starting to see folks wanting to gather more or hold different events as actual in person.
And Tim, do you feel like as we come out of COVID, that more corporations are going to be really looking to stick with familiar partners at the community level? Do you think they're going to be open to new relationships? And then the other piece, as you know, one of the core focal topics for today is really thinking about funding for operations. And it's I would argue that it can be a really compelling topic, but it's often not communicated in that way. And of course, particularly with corporations, we know that that can be a pretty high hurdle to get over. So do you have any guidance for us around that?
Yeah, there's a lot in there because the actual donations for operating, and I am probably in the minority when it comes to this. So let me step back. So to the first question, will there be change coming as we kind of look at the new normal? I think what you're going to see a lot of the corporations is probably buckle down a little bit more, become more focused in where they're going to give and what they're going to give to. As we kind of talk about that, and I think one of the things that has been percolating for a few years, but is really starting to come forefront is that lens of equity, especially when it comes to DEI. I think there's a lot more corporations that are embracing that, and they're really taking that to the forefront, whereas 5 years ago, that was not necessarily the case. I think we're seeing that not only in corporations, but we're seeing that in nonprofit organizations. So a good example is I sit on the 4-Acre Operations Board, and we're working through that as well right now. I sit on the museum board. We're also working through that. We're making sure that's incorporated so that it is part of our DNA as well. And the same at Alaska Airlines. We're really taking a larger look. I think most people are probably familiar. We just launched a new livery called Our Commitment, which is our partnership with Equity in Education. And while it's focused on UNCF, it's really about that equity in education across the board and what we can do as a corporation to support career pathways, that we can support those DEI initiatives that are out there. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that come 2021 and through 2022. Back to the operating costs, because that's always a hot topic. And I am a firm believer that corporations, funders, and I'm just going to use everybody as a kind of a catch-all, should be actually supporting operating costs. I think I would probably be a minority in that, but I think more corporations and funders are coming around to that. So one of the things like we've done for the Alaska Airlines Foundation, and this is actually just started last year, we will allow 50% of that donation to go towards operating costs, whether that be salary, utilities, whatever it might be, and then 50% to program. Because, to kind of put that into a nutshell, I think the thing is most funders want to have some sort of audience. So they say, we're going to go ahead and give $10,000 and we want everybody to have laptops. Well, that's great to have, 100 laptops or whatever it might be. But if you don't have the people that can run the software, that can actually teach people to use the laptop, then it comes back to your coffee analogy. I mean, you're only getting part of that cup. So I think more groups are starting to understand that it takes both in order to make those programs work. Because at the end of the day, it is about the programs and what they can do to support the communities, but you still have to be able to operate those programs. So it takes a little bit of both. I think I come back to your first slide that you put in. I think you said everybody, 100% of money just goes, I want it to go directly into that program. Well, 100% of that money just going into the program is, again, you bought the stove, but nobody knows how to cook on the stove. There's no gas, there's no electric on the stove. So it's a pretty big hurdle to get over. And I know a lot of developmental directors are going out there and trying to explain that to groups. I'm an advocate. I always have been an advocate. I managed to get our foundation a little bit more over the edge. I don't know if we'll ever get to 100%. I don't know if you could ever get any funder to 100%. Just here's a donation, whatever that amount is, use it as you see fit. I think that would be an ideal situation, because I think organizations, if corporations, foundations, funders in general trust that organization enough to give them money, then they should rely on them to put the money to them. I'll leave it at that.
Gosh, that's a great way to leave it. One of the things I wonder, this gets back to Jim's earlier point about the importance of name recognition and affiliation. And I think even a quote, I don't mean to put you on the spot, you don't actually have to answer this question, but being able to quote someone like yourself in the position that you hold with a corporation like Alaska Airlines goes a long way. And so I think even if you're on a journey internally, as long as Alaska Airlines is doing anything in operating, if that's, I just encourage you to ponder that. If that's something that you're willing to have somebody put on their website, that really helps carry a lot of water for the field.
Totally agree. And so just to that point, if you do go on our foundation page, you'll see that we specifically line that out to 50%. Because again, the foundation is really where a lot of our cash donations come from. On the corporate side, there is some. It's mainly in we're an airline, so it's our stock and trade. We can provide vouchers to fly anywhere Alaska Airlines flies. But we have outlined that, and I think that was a pretty big move on our part to kind of plant that flag in the ground. And I would like to see more corporations do that, and I will always be able to say that. And I think there's a few folks that are on this call or on this Zoom right now that know that. So I think that might be one of the reasons I'm here.
That's great. Well, you'll probably find yourself on Twitter.
Yeah.
In a good way. And then we had a question in the chat. We often find as community foundations that corporate funders will actually exclude us. I know this is often true for United Ways. Do you have any insights about ways to, again, get over that hurdle with corporations who don't really quite understand how community foundations contribute to supporting the nonprofit sector and the communities that they serve?
Yeah, and that is a tough one. Because for the most part, I would say Alaska Airlines, and just for some background, so I do the corporate philanthropy in the state of Alaska for Alaska Airlines. I'm here in Anchorage at our regional offices here. And I also am the executive director for the foundation. On the corporate side, we may donate a couple of vouchers for fundraising. And I know that in the past, we've done some stuff like with the Juneau Community Foundation when they had they had the fire at the park and we were doing a rebuild. There are certain things that I think hit to all groups and organizations where there's an opportunity to get the funding. But I think the biggest thing for groups, especially foundations, is to use the network. You have a board or you have advisory board. There's a couple of folks that I know that sit on the community foundation around the state. It is to be able to use that network to figure out the best way to get to those decision makers. And those decision makers are folks like myself, they're fundraisers. Not every organization is going to be able to do something, but there's always a way to kind of talk to them about the why you're doing it, because with these, especially in the affiliates, so take like these Petersburg. So they're an umbrella organization that's supporting the community. I think every corporation is always keen to how they can support the community. So it's a matter of getting to those funders and explaining to them how a foundation works. I can tell you when I first started working with foundations, this would have been back in the 2000s, I had a hard time putting my head around it too. This was actually with the Alaska Community Foundation where I was with the railroad, and they were downtown across from City Cafe, and I was trying to go, wait a second. So there's this organization that puts all these funds together that are doing specific things, but to understand that it impacts the community, I think is what more corporations need to do, more corporations need to understand. And I think it's a difficult task to try and explain. Well, we have this fund, this fund, this fund, this fund that does this, and we're interested in you just providing a donation to us, and then that way we can best assured. This comes back to kind of operating as well, because I think corporations and funders want to be able to connect the dots. They want to see A to B to B to C, and not immediately jump to C. They need to be able to make that connection, and that's very hard as it's usually, and we do it here at Alaska Airlines is we try to avoid passing. And that's where I think a lot of folks kind of see community foundations as a pass through because they work directly with the organizations. And they're not, but it's making that connection to why the foundation, or excuse me, why that specific community foundation is important to the community.
Yeah, that's great counsel. I have a friend who works in nonprofit marketing, and she often says, don't tell people you're everything. And I think as community foundations, we often get stuck. We want to explain the mechanics and all the great services that we provide. And it's just usually a bit of overwhelm.
I think it's important to be able to draw, it's to paint the picture, it's to tell the story about what the community foundation is there for. And that is for the community. Because again, I come back to, I think every type of funder, I mean, you can go through our background and see what we support, where we fund, and it's always about community. That is the same, whether it's, Wells Fargo's, or the ConocoPhillips of the world, or as you drill down to Alaskan Brewing. I mean, it's about the community, and that's what they're. At the end of the day, that's what they're going to support. But it's to be able to paint that picture. And whereas, something like the Juneau Community Foundation has already got some sort of a partnership with Alaskan Brewing. It's being for them to be able to get out of just Juneau itself to get to the larger foundation.
Great. So I'm going to ask you to, I know you've got to leave us in a few minutes, but I'm going to ask you to take off your corporate hat and put on your board member hat, and just share a little bit. You don't have to get into specific organizations, but what it is about board service that really compels you.
I think because, and just that, so I'm going to sort of have to take off my corporate side. It's to understanding both sides of the coin. The one reason why I really like being on the board for operations board is because they are in the business of nonprofits. And I a lot of people are, boy, you're using the term business, it's not a for-profit, but at the end of the day, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, they have to be solvent. And I think the one thing that Board does a phenomenal job doing, and not only being on the board before that, I worked with them with some other nonprofits that were good. They're just really good at making sure that organization is pointed in the right direction. And pointed in the right direction on a number of things, whether it be finances or board setup. That is the one thing that I really enjoy about. But board service overall is, come back, I'm going to use it, is community. There is something about it to the involvement at a different level than you would be at just a business. It's very granular. Something like the museum board. This is my second round with them, and just the transformation that I've seen. It's a great staff. Julie Decker does a great job. But just being a part and watching that transformation and the work that it does with the community, not only in the Anchorage community but for the state. And then, boy, I could go on because I sit on the Atwood Foundation board. And then I sit on chamber boards as well. And it's each of those boards is so important to how a community is. It really is a lifeblood of the community, and it's important work that we do as board members. It's tough because it's in all capacities. It's a volunteer, and it's an option. You make that choice to do that, but it's a good choice.
That's great. Well, and I wanted you to talk about board service because it's the kind of thing that, in my experience, makes people light up. And I think that was true for you. And I think it's one of the things we want to remind people when we're talking about fundraising, whether it's for a project or a program or for operations, that all we're really asking board members to do is harness that passion and share it with other folks and ask them to join in investing in that work, whatever it might be. So that's terrific.
And you hit on the point. I think that's where, and we all know this. I mean, it's research, it's network. I mentioned stories, it's about impact. But the networking cannot be disqualified. If you have a board of 8 people, I mean, there is only, well, especially in the state of Alaska, there is no degrees of separation, but there's literally 1 degree of separation. So somebody knows somebody that can make something happen. And I think that's probably the biggest benefit that a board can do. That doesn't mean that we're all going to go out with fundraisers. It doesn't mean that we're going to be soliciting certain organizations, but they're going to know someone who has that connection that can at least get a sounds like a sales call, but a foot through the door. And I think that's the most important thing. It comes to relationships, and relationships, whether it's in business or in the nonprofit world, are critical. I mean, I think if, especially when I, go out and do something, and like I approve something, the company is entrusting me to approve something of a large scale. I want to know that the relationship is there, that if we're going to fund something to a certain level, that we're assured that, it's going to have the impact that, the corporation is looking for. Where I think board members can be very valuable is putting the right people in contact with the right people so that they know you have that time, even if it's a cup of coffee. It's just like, I just want to pick your brain. I mean, yeah, it sounds stupid and we all know it, but we have to do it. It's a little bit harder right now, especially with COVID. I think that's one of the things that makes it a little bit more difficult, because I would rather be doing this in person. I think we all would, but then again, across this vast region, I see all the folks that are dialing into it. It's just not going to be possible. But those coffees, those, just lunches, or those just passing in the grocery store are really, really important.
Well, and you make an excellent point, particularly when I think often when we're talking about smaller communities and rural communities, there's a sort of a deficit focus. And one of the amazing things about smaller communities and rural communities is that you do have fewer degrees of separation, and that you can make things happen because the distance from here to there is usually shorter, although in rural Alaska, maybe that's not a fair assertion. But so that's great. So I want to, as we transition a little bit, I want to invite Jim or Lauren or Kim, if you have any questions that you want to ask Tim before we leave him, please go ahead and chime in. And I don't think I'm missing anything over here in the chat. Let me see. I think we're good. Okay. So Tim, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And now, Lauren, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the Arkansas Affiliate Program and a little bit of the history, and then also just kind of reflect on what you've heard so far from both Jim and Tim.
Sure. Lauren Morris with the Arkansas Community Foundation, and I am a toddler mom and have, so if you hear Baby Shark playing for the millionth time in the background, it's because it's the bewitching hour. And I'm in an almost finished remodeled office, so it has like a Soviet era-esque feel to it, but I'm always like checking out people's artwork behind them, and so I'm like thinking, these people, to tell them what they think about this room. But I do work for the Arkansas Community Foundation. I'm the affiliate director, so I guess it seems like I'm the Arkansas Mariko. And we have 29 local affiliate offices that serve 45 of the counties in Arkansas directly. And we were established in 1976. So that means we're rounding out 45 years of service for Arkansans. And most of our affiliates are celebrating their 20th anniversary. So you can kind of see where we are as compared to maybe how long you've been around. We have over 350 board members that work in local communities across the state, and they are my heart and my passion and my inspiration. And so that's a little bit about the Arkansas Community Foundation. And from what I've heard, I don't have any real systematic or evidence-based answers for you guys, but I have all the anecdotes, and I know what has worked in some places in Arkansas, and this is far less scientific than what you've heard so far, but I really believe that everyone has to figure out what is going to work in their community, and it's not the same everywhere. So I can share bits and pieces of what's worked in some places in Arkansas, and hope that helps you get where you need to be. And I just really appreciate Tim's words. I think for the Arkansas Community Foundation, our affiliate is our most valuable asset. And I'm a little biased as the affiliate director, but absolutely believe that from the very bottom of my heart. And it just made me smile to hear, whenever I hear a good board member, it makes me smile, and I can tell that Tim's a good board member. And so it was really good to hear from him.
Great, thank you. And Kim, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more about yourself. And then if you would get us started, I think we're going to dig into the anecdotes that Lauren referenced, and would love to hear you talk about the journey that your board is on, from sort of no focus on fundraising for operations to where they are today.
Okay. My affiliate started out as an independent community foundation in 86, 83, 83. And they were, for 20 years, basically cash in, cash out. They helped. I live in a gated community that has a very large property owners association, and we have golf courses and lakes and community centers and a performance hall and swimming pools and all kinds of stuff. And they were, at one point in time, they were building the Performing Arts Center. And so this kind of independent community foundation started raising money to help outfit with equipment the Performing Arts Center. So that's kind of how they really got started. So it's always been cash in, cash out, and they not only help the community in that respect, but they also went outside the community and helped the local Boys and Girls Club. And they started the Council on Literacy in the town of Hot Springs. We're about 15 miles outside of the town of Hot Springs. So they did a lot of things like that as well. And 4 years ago, they became an affiliate of the Arkansas Community Foundation. So they started endowments in about 2000 through the Arkansas Community Foundation for the management of the funds. Before that, they didn't have an executive director. They didn't, everything was volunteer run. And so 4 years ago, they got an executive director, which is myself. And all of a sudden, they've got to come up with an operating endowment and figure out how they're going to fund operations. Because before, they basically just, sent out mailers, so it was some stationery and postage, and that was kind of about it. Once in a while, they had a party. So there wasn't a whole lot that they needed funds for. But those funds they got through a membership campaign. So they asked people in the community to become members of the foundation at that point in time and use those funds for operations. Well, now with an executive director, and we've grown quite a bit, and we're doing more things like getting involved in the schools and trying to form coalitions with schools and mentors and other organizations. We're requiring a few more funds than they needed 5 and 6 years ago. So we're trying to figure out how to develop our operating endowment so we don't have to say that we've got to use some of the funds that you are donating for our operations. And with my board, that is a very hard sell, because the people who are trying to increase memberships, because we still have memberships, want to say that all the funds that you give for memberships go to grants. And the people who are going out for funds for grants are saying all the funds you give are going to grants. Nobody is willing to say that we need some funds for operations. And because of COVID, every year we've had a benefit event, and we raised $15,000 to $17,000 usually, and we gave 5 to 10 of it to organizational endowments, and then we kept the rest and would put that, some of it, half of it into the operating endowment and half of it into our granting endowment. Well, of course, with COVID, we postponed it 3 times. And I think we're finally going to have our benefit event in the fall, but that means we've been, a year and a half without any extra funds. And the fact that current demographics, younger people don't donate to things the way that the older generation does. And we're mostly retirees, so most of the people here still donate in larger quantities, but the next people coming in are not joiners. They don't want to be a member. So membership is going down. We've had to delay our benefit event, and it's kind of like, okay, where are we going to get some money? So last summer, they decided they get really serious about trying to increase the operating endowment. So they ran a campaign. People on the development committee put up matching funds that you talked about, to send out notices to the membership and any other donors that we have records for, to see if we could raise $10,000 to go into our operating endowment. Well, I don't know if it was because of COVID or it was around Thanksgiving time, and everybody else and their brother was sending out notices for donations because it was the end of the year stuff. And it didn't work out too well. I think they got 2,000, maybe 2,000. So I am now trying to convince them that, at least for now, we need to start thinking about using, except for maybe 5,000, all of the proceeds from our benefit event to go into our operating endowment. Because if we don't start shoring that up and being able to support ourselves, we're going to have some problems in the future. And my board is, but we've always used those funds for granting. But I have finally talked the current board president into realizing that this is a necessity. So she is behind me and trying to push it as well. Plus, I've got some new board members that don't have the "we've always done it this way" mentality, which is a really big issue with my board. And so they're seeing things from a different light and are more willing to put more emphasis on the operating endowment than the old timers were. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Great, thank you. And Kim, does everybody on the board give? Is there the expectation that everybody gives?
There's the expectation that everybody gives, but not necessarily to operations. Because, so-and-so has their favorite charity and they have their own endowment over here. So I'm going to give my funds to that endowment. So no, they don't all give to operations, but they all do donate to some endowment within the community foundation.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Lauren, do you have any sense of whether there's a lot of board giving or a requirement for board giving from any of the other affiliates in Arkansas?
It's kind of a mishmash. We have boards that have 100% giving to operating funds, and we have boards that have 0%. And so I have if you've ever heard the saying, culture eats strategy for lunch, this is it in real life. you know, some of our communities, the nonprofits that they sit on, our board members sit on many other nonprofit boards, and there's no giving to them either. So it's it really is kind of a mishmash. But I will say that in the affiliates that have board members that have been on since, some of them helped build the affiliate from the ground up, that they are much more likely to give to the operating fund, because they kind of struggled through it from the beginning, and they want to make sure that it keeps building and stays that way. So, you know, I will say, as a foundation, and again, I'll say this as a generalization, and that what works for one place doesn't always work for another, but as a foundation, system-wide, our affiliates, by far the most effective way that they raised funds for their operating was through matching dollars. And that's really helped most of them build up sustainable operating funds and grant making funds. And those board members that saw that know the value of that, and I think continue to want to contribute to that. But there are 5 of our affiliates, and Hot Springs Village is one of them, that did not benefit from this significant matching dollar program that we had. And so they are still working on a lot of different ways to really build up their operating endowments and their unrestricted funds. So, you know, one of the things that we most recently did that I think kind of highlighted where board members really give and communities where they didn't, was that the Arkansas Community Foundation offered up a match for our affiliates to help them raise unrestricted dollars so that they could go to their own board members or other folks and say, hey, we've got a match on the table. If you match, if you go in on this, even Little Rock is going in on this with us. And your donation's gonna double, and it's gonna help support our community foundation. And I think what we saw was that we had some parameters around the match. It was really set up to help our affiliates go to some higher dollar donors with a match request. And so we had a $1,000 minimum donation match, up to $10,000 for each donor, dollar for dollar match that was going into unrestricted funds. And, you know, in some of our very small, very rural communities where agriculture rules, it didn't work for them. It wasn't right. They were not able to leverage that match dollar with that minimum amount. And in other places, they were really, there were board members that, you know, their annual giving was, the expectation was $250. And that minimum really pushed those board members and other donors to up that donation to the $1,000 since the match was on the table. So I really saw a stark difference in board giving across the board with that match. And it really, I think, highlighted for me the need to make, for us to, when we offer a match like that, to really take into account what's going to work best for each of our affiliates. Because if that minimum had been $100 for that smaller rural area, they would have been able to get far more match dollars than they did with the $1,000 minimum, which was $0. So, so it's just, it was really telling when we did that, you know, what the culture was and where we could leverage those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. And Tim, I think you had a thought.
I did have one, and it was kind of when we were talking about operating. I think it kind of comes back to what Jim was saying earlier. I think people look at the benefits to self, and again, when you talk about operating funds, it is just so nebulous. But if you say, I'm going to give $100 so that there are softballs for the team, or something within there, it's almost a tangible thing. So, and I don't know how you bridge that gap with the operating to make it tangible. I think I saw someone in the email saying, or excuse me, in the chat saying, you know, maybe you need to look at stuff like convening and that. That's where I think they can get their heads around it. But the matching grants makes a lot of sense because they already see someone's taking the plunge. Oh, well, if I give my $100, that's actually $200. And that comes back to benefits to self. It's like, I didn't just give $100, I gave $200, you know? I think that makes a lot of sense. So I wanted to add that. And also, I really apologize. I do have to run. I'm going to throw in my chat, my email, and also where our giving programs are. So feel free to shoot me an email or take a look at that. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to let me speak today. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us, Tim. It was great. You added lots of good stuff for us to chew on. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about the Whatcom Community Foundation where I am. You know, we started out with what I call the blessing and the curse of the big gift. And part of that meant that the board was brought on with the expectation that they would never have to fundraise for anything, operations, grant making, anything at all. And it was an amazing group of people, and they really created the DNA of the Community Foundation. And I won't go waxing on about that, but those are things I'm incredibly grateful for, and they serve the organization and the community to this day. But that was one of the things that it was the grit and the oyster, and boy, to turn it into a pearl took a long time. And it was very much viewed that all fundraising was a staff function early on. And our Community Foundation is 25 years old this year. I've not been here the whole time. It's 25, I'm 29, you can do the math. And but I was here for the journey of when I was actually on the board at the time, that the board was very much of the mind that this was a staff function. And I won't take you through all of the increments, but one of the things that was really interesting, and I want to go back to one of the things that Jim said early on about this opportunity to educate donors. And I think it is, I always remind people that people love education. People don't like being educated. And I know this isn't what Jim was saying, but I think we have to be mindful of the way we're communicating with people about things we want them to know. And so the way we try to approach it often is through our own learning. And so that's why I share the coffee cup graphic, or at least describe it to people, because it was a great realization for me. It helped me think not just about the Community Foundation, but about every organization. I was one of those people before I got into this field who complained about overhead. So I am, I've had my own education, if you will. And I think when it comes to operating funding in particular, where we finally got over the hump with our board, and Kim talked about this, just that kind of stuckness of people being willing to give. And Lauren shared that there's a mix across the state of Arkansas, and I would imagine that's true in Alaska as well. Is that what we've basically said to donors, or to our board specifically, is, so we always ask that question of nonprofit organizations that we're making grants to. We ask if they have 100% board support, and we don't encourage that they do a minimum. We don't encourage that they do a give or get kind of strategy. We just want to know that what the terminology that we use is that people have made a gift that is meaningful to them, and people are going to make their own decision based on their finances, based on other things they want to support. But we also tell people, if your board cares enough to devote their time and to share their expertise and their energy to the work of the Community Foundation, they are the closest to your work other than staff. And so if they're not willing to make a contribution of whatever size is, again, meaningful to them, then something's not quite right. And so it's worth a conversation. And we've got a board. I mean, I've got just an absolute rock star board. They could not be more supportive of staff, more thoughtful, bigger cheerleaders. And yet, even over this last year, we've had some folks say, because we did not do a good job as staff of making clear in the language that we wrote in the job description, we do include that we ask people to make a contribution that's meaningful to them. We didn't have language about operating, which for us is called the Leadership Fund. And so we literally just last night at the board meeting asked them to pass a revision to the job description so that it actually includes a reference to the Leadership Fund, so it supports our operations. And then we included a little footnote that gave people a little context, because a lot of the folks on our board have been on for a long time. And so they heard this before, but they'd forgotten about it. And it might be somebody who's particularly passionate about giving to human services or education or arts and culture or whatever it might be. But we really needed to just kind of bring them back home and remind them, you are such a champion for this organization and for the people who do the work on a daily basis. And so this is part of sort of closing the loop. And again, it's the reason that I asked him to talk about the boards that he's on and why he serves on boards. And I'm sure that if we tapped anybody on this call who serves on a board, we would hear the same kind of passion and enthusiasm. And so I think if we can get people to really understand what they're fueling and what they're making possible, and folks noted this in the chat, that it's really not about the list of things, and we're often our own worst enemy in terms of communication. So I would really encourage that it's worth spending some time thinking about how you want to talk about it, and have your board be a part of that work, because they're the ones that, again, I always tell people that if you can share what you're passionate about, and you're making a gift that is meaningful to you, then all you're asking other people to do is join you in making that gift. And hopefully you've already done your homework if you're talking to somebody outside the organization and you're trying to figure out whether their interests are actually aligned or not, because if they're not, you should be talking to them about something else, like the price of coffee. So I think those are just a few little tidbits that I'd share about our organization. And one of the things that we want to make sure to cover too is this question of operating endowments. And it's obviously a very different animal than even giving to annual operating support. And I guess my 2 cents would be, and I would love Lauren and Kim to chime in on this as well, that I think so much of it, even when we're small organizations, we can figure out how to, and I hate some of this terminology because I fully agree with the comments that both Tim and Jim made earlier about relationships. That is the nature and the essence of our work, and whether it's internal or external. And so I don't want to sound like this is mechanical, but there's a lot of jargon that we use that it just fits. But when we sort of break people into segments or groups of people that have different interests, like the younger generation, for example, they have different needs and interests. Kim talked about the fact that people don't want to be members of something. But younger people do want to be part of a community, and they do want to be part of something that feels more like a family. So it's not necessarily that different, but it needs to feel different. And the personal benefits that both Jim and Tim talked about are the thing that we have to figure out. We have to really understand how to speak to the personal benefits. And I'll share, I don't have it pulled up, but I will share, we did a blog post a number of years ago about the endorphins and the benefits that you get, the actual physical benefits and the emotional benefits that you get from giving, which I think, especially in the time of COVID, why wouldn't people see that as a really compelling benefit? So, and I think to leap for a moment to the idea of legacy giving, that's something that I think is a different kind of conversation to have with people, both about operations and specifically about operating fund legacy, or excuse me, endowments, because that is a legacy for your community. If you care about your community and you know the value of a community foundation in supporting that community and in helping it be kind of its best self, then that can be a really inspiring way to talk to folks about making those kinds of gifts. And again, it's not about the people, it's not about turning on the light switches, it's not about paying the phone bill. It's about all of those things that really make a community thrive. So Lauren, Kim, anything that you would share about the endowment fundraising specifically?
Well, I will say, to continue the conversation about the what's in it for me frame of mind, I mentioned earlier that that there were 5 affiliates that did not benefit from the significant match program that helped establish most of our affiliates. And one of them was Cleburne County. And what worked in that community specifically is really this legacy giving. And what it looked like there was establishing lots of named operating endowments. So they actually don't have, most of our affiliates have a Cleburne County operating endowment or Hot Springs Village operating endowment. And in Cleburne County, they don't. They have 8 different operating endowments that all have people's names attached to them. So if you were just looking at the list of funds, you would never know that that charitable purpose of that endowment was to support the operating of the Cleveland County Community Foundation. And so it's really powerful that that name is going to forever support Cleveland County. And that's what really resonated with people specifically in that community. They just had such a hard time raising operating funds, but this really worked. And, you know, the Community Foundation, we are so complicated, all of us are, with what we do and how we work. And it's like, if you can get an elevator speech, good for you. But most of the time we're like the airplane speech where you have to sit next to someone and listen to them for a minute while we try to get out how it is we do what we do. And so, you know, they were having a grant reception, a big reception where they had their grantees all come together and invited donors to it. And one of the donors came up to our executive director there and said, "Why are these grants so small? I know y'all have raised tens of thousands of dollars lately." And so that led to this whole conversation about like exactly what endowments are and how they work and their value. And that donor actually ended up establishing a separate endowment that was specifically to help establish more endowments. So endowmentception. And so, you know, the charitable purpose of that fund is to help donors get over, we in Arkansas have a $10,000 threshold. If you want a fund endowed, it has to be at least that much to make it, you know, worth our time. And so, and we have different ways that we help people get up to that amount. But this endowment that was established was specifically so that if someone wanted a named endowment and they had $6,000 or $8,000 that they can contribute, but they couldn't get that across that $10,000 finish line, that this fund could be used to help them get across that finish line. So it was kind of lots of things going on here. It was legacy, it was a name recognition, a what's in it for me, and there was a match involved, and that really helped them get where they needed to be. And actually, one of those was a planned gift. So it was a woman that left her estate to the Cleveland County Community Foundation, and we liquidated the estate and have her name forever in place as the Libby S. Pierce endowment that funds one of the operating endowments that they have there.
That's fantastic. Kim, anything you want to add?
I guess one of the things, back to what you were saying about approaching the next generation a little bit differently and phrasing things differently and all, is my board, in that we've always done it this way. I said, why don't we just not use the word membership, but supporter or benefactor or something, but just not membership, because these people don't want to be members of anything. And couldn't talk them into it. Talked them into it for about a week, and then they reverted back to membership. So I'm still struggling with that one.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, following on what I was saying earlier about, you know, trying to experiment. If your board doesn't buy into these things, you know, this is where maybe there's opportunities to talk with them about trying something out and seeing it, because exactly this like, you know, A/B testing, you know, rather than suggesting, hey, let's take out the word membership and replace it with something else. You could potentially generate some evidence of like trying out different language with different demographics and seeing which ones do resonate. And now you actually have a case for why you're doing it in a particular way. And I'm not saying that your intuition is wrong or right. It's you know, by just trying, and the only way you learn is by trying things out. And I know a lot of times it's easier said than done, because you still have to convince a board or your group to agree to try out something new. But like when we worked with the Alaska Public Media affiliate, that's what they had done, because they tried this different messaging, because the DC branch had always, or the main office had always said, you have to send your letters out. When they're 6 months out, you send out this letter. When they're 4 months out, you send this letter. And when they're 2 months out, you send this letter. And when asked why, the answer was always, well, that's just how we've always done it. And no one had ever actually really tested whether or not these these different letters made a difference. And so it's just something to think about. Those are the places where, you know, and some of these A/B tests don't have to be rocket science where, you know, you need to hire a PhD economist to put all this stuff together. I mean, some of it can just be even at a fairly intuitive level, just try a few things out and see what works. So that's just something to think about anyway.
Thanks, Jim. And I think also another tool to use is just bringing people in, because sometimes if your staff, or even if the idea comes from another board member, it might resonate differently if you're hearing from other people in your community. So maybe you just bring in a group of younger people who have maybe some familiarity and maybe none, and just ask them what it is that they think would be compelling, and in the process get to share a little bit more about the Community Foundation and use it as a relationship builder, if nothing else. So legacy giving, I think one of the things that that the ACF staff pointed out was just that obviously COVID has really made all of us just face mortality a lot more regularly. A lot of people are kind of revisiting what matters to them and what kind of legacy they want to leave. And so I'm curious what you all are seeing in the field, and would love folks to pop ideas or questions in the chat about that as well. I think, I know in our community foundation, we've seen a tremendous growth. We've had significant gifts, $10,000, $20,000 gifts from people that we've never met, never had any interaction with, simply because they knew that we were doing something to respond to COVID. And one of the things, I wasn't able to be on the earlier session, but I think you had a chance to meet my colleague, Sam Martinez, who talked a little bit about some of the work that we did during the pandemic. And one of the things that we found was that it really helped a lot of people understand what we do. And we use the Swiss Army knife analogy a lot for the Community Foundation. To Lauren's point, we're all really complicated. We do a lot of different things. And a lot of the things, the other analogy I like to use is the bond card, because there's so many things and James never gets the full training before he goes out into the dangerous environment. And there are things that we know we could do, or that we could do, that we don't even know about yet. And so COVID, I think for most, if not all of us, has really illuminated the potential of community foundations. And so I'm curious what some of the conversations that you're hearing in the community, and this isn't just tied to legacy giving, but just what are you hearing out there? And Jim, you're in the community as well, so if you have thoughts, please chime in.
Well, I can say that one of the biggest lessons we learned through COVID was the value of an endorsement. And so I can give one example of like a state level endorsement and one example of a local level endorsement that really catapulted Arkansas Community Foundation's response. So first, the governor of Arkansas in a press conference endorsed the Arkansas Community Foundation as a place to give to support Arkansans that had lost wages, or local organizations that they knew were struggling. And to your point, I think people knew that we were ones that were out there supporting Arkansans. And I think it also helps that we have such a local presence so often. And from that endorsement, we got a little over 3.5 million for Arkansans. Almost all of it is granted out. Some of it is still in process, really looking at building up resilience in our communities. And that was not endowed, but what it did was it introduced us to a lot of new audiences, both donors and grantees, that didn't really know us or didn't really understand what we did. And I think it really got us an opportunity to work a lot more closely with both donors and grantees across the state. And then the second example was actually of a local board member to go to talk about what Tim was saying, that local board members sometimes are our most valuable assets. That one of our local board members was an employee at a huge employer in the county that very much wanted to get some corporate giving in response to COVID-19. And so that employee made an introduction, and the corporate entity ended up giving a field of interest fund for the local board to direct. And that was a way for them to kind of dip their toe in the water to see like, hey, what is this community foundation? What are you guys doing? How do you work? You know, and so the employee was kind of our endorsement, and then their experience with us was our second endorsement. And again, this introduced us to a new donor, and you know, they wanted to see how it was going to go, and now they've made a much bigger investment with us. So I think if anything, COVID-19 is the horrible fallout that many struggled through. It did, when a door closes, another one opens, I guess. And it really did, I think, highlight the work that we do. I think it highlighted a lot of systemic gaps that we all need to look at a little more closely, but it also connected donors to a resource that they didn't know about, where their philanthropy could do the work and get to people that do spend a lot of intentional time knowing the critical work that's going on in the communities to solve these problems. And Aerojet didn't have the staff time or the motivation to do any of that, but they knew that there were people that did do it, and that's where they needed to put their dollars.
That's great. And with regard to plan giving, I'm wondering what both Lauren, you and Kim, or Arkansas Community Foundation and Kim in Hot Springs do with relationship to connecting with professional advisors, with attorneys, CPAs, and financial advisors and folks like that around plan giving.
You got any planned gifts cooking in Hot Springs Village, Kim?
Well, we've gotten several new ones this year, and I have talked to several attorneys, and one of the most compelling reasons to include us in estate planning is that at some point in time, if your interests change and your passions change, you can change horses. You can change who the beneficiary is of that portion of your estate without going back to the attorney and spending another $1,000, because all you have to do is change the direction in your endowment, your proposed endowment. So that to me is one of the most compelling reasons. The other is just telling people that, you know, you're very philanthropic and you give a lot to the community while you're here, but what's going to happen when you're gone? Where's that money going to come from when you're no longer here? And an example is in my church. We've had, you know, we had people who gave $10,000 every year or more to my church, and they have passed away, and making up that difference has been a real struggle. And it almost makes me think that large gifts aren't really that good for an organization, because when that benefactor is no longer around, how do they make up that gap? And establishing an endowment, you continue to give to that organization forever. And your gift is not gone when you are. So to me, those are the biggest reasons to include a community foundation in your estate planning.
Kim, I am going to push back. I want to encourage big gifts because they're great. I appreciate your point, but I think we want more of all sizes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've been really focusing on, I can't remember how many years ago this was, but one of my colleagues was at a conference and she was talking to somebody and they said, you know, if I had 2 weeks left to live and I had to spend every day of it at work, I'd spend 13 days with professional advisors. And so the trusted relationships that those attorneys and CPAs and financial advisors have with folks are really important. And it's a great way to just expand your network by making sure that those folks know who you are and what you do. And even now with attorneys and CPAs, et cetera, that we've worked with for many years, they're still learning about what we do and about what tools are in the Swiss Army knife. And so, and it's also led to a lot of other gifts, a lot of other new relationships. And the other thing we found is that when we get a referral from a professional advisor for somebody who's coming to us to talk about a planned gift, we just talk to them about a donor advised fund as a way to get started and to figure out if the relationship is going to work for them. Do they like working with us? Do they like the way we work and what we do for the community? And even if it's not a donor advised fund, it's a great way to just get an opportunity to share more about, again, the organization and its impact on the community. So I think that, even in rural communities, we've all got to deal with the IRS, and we've all got to figure out how to what happens to the stuff we have when we're not going to be here anymore. And so those relationships, I personally can't say enough about. And it's not always going to be the right fit. There are definitely some folks in our community who are in the financial planning field, for example, who see us as competition because they're really looking to keep as much under their management as possible. I know we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of who's managing the money, but I think for us, it's all about alignment. It's about finding people who kind of see the world the way that you do in terms of community and community impact and the leverage that community foundations add. And even in smaller communities, there's usually just too much for any one person to know. And so I think that's one of the things that we've had so many of our donors say. I like working with the Community Foundation because there's no way I could know everything the Community Foundation knows about this place and about what it needs and wants and how I can help make that happen. So let's see, I want to touch, shift gears a little bit and talk about, yes.
It looks like Jim and Nina both have their hands up.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. That's what happens when I start talking. Okay, Jim, go.
I'm not sure whether Nina or I had my hand up first. So Nina, if I just cut in front of you, my apologies. I'm curious, like Kim, Lauren, actually Mari as well, if you've given, with respect to like legacy gifts and stuff, I'm curious if you've given any thought to talking with donors about like longer term gifts that have some expiration associated with it. And the reason I ask this is the foundation that I'm a board member on, when it was set up, the foundation itself was set up with a 25-year life deliberately. Because the person who set it up felt that, missions start to change over time and board members change. And over the years, things just can be different. And so the thought of leaving a large chunk of money to something that was going to be around in perpetuity, 100 years from now, maybe, the world has changed and maybe that's not the most pressing need for the funds anymore. And I'm just curious, like, I don't have any research on this one because I'm kind of curious about it now. I'm starting to think about it now that our foundation is sunsetting, is whether or not there's any way to have conversations with donors about, well, if you're hesitant to endow something, to make a large gift that generates a stream of income for a time limited period, and whether or not that might be attractive to some people in some ways, depending upon what their interests are.
Right. Kim, you want to start?
Well, we really don't have funds that sunset, have a limit on them. But with those people who are hesitant because things change and charities come and go and things like that, we encourage them to do either a field of interest fund where I want to support animal welfare and not necessarily the Garland County Humane Society, or I want to support early childhood literacy and not necessarily the day school daycare that's down the street or the preschool. So we try to encourage people to do things like that, or just have a named endowment that is unrestricted, and then the foundation, the affiliate board, controls those funds and can help meet the current need of the community instead of what need was there 20 years ago.
And in our case, Jim, we do that, and we just talk to donors about what it is they'd like the time horizon to look like. And we just let people know that whatever, if they want all the money to go out right away, great. If they want it to be over a 10 or 25-year period, that's fine. And if they want it to be perpetual, that's wonderful as well. That it takes all of those different types of gifts. And so we definitely have a number of donors who said, I don't care that it lasts forever, but I do want it to last for X number of years. Okay, Nina, sorry for the wait.
Lauren, did you have something you wanted to add to that question?
No, Kim totally covered it, and so did Mari. So
I was really curious to somebody who brought up the idea of endorsements, and we met yesterday with the new head of ConocoPhillips, who's for those of you not from Alaska, pretty big donor here in Alaska, corporate donor here in Alaska. So I wish Tim was still on the line, but and I was very surprised at his question about they were a big donor to one of the campaigns that all the affiliates and the Alaska Community Foundation just recently ran. And he asked a question, well, is it still helpful to have somebody like ConocoPhillips endorse your organization, which sort of took me aback because of course it's helpful to get a $200,000 gift, period. But to have a large corporation acknowledge that the community foundation is where they want to make that gift, it was significant. But when I think about it, we have a lot of our affiliates that also have sort of endorsements by Matsu Health Foundation or First Bank, and I'm thinking there's maybe ways that we can learn from some of the things you're doing in ways to thank or acknowledge or let those corporations know that we really do appreciate and value their partnership. So there things that you're doing in Arkansas or anything that you're doing in your foundation that we can be thinking of to do a better job at letting people know that.
Lauren, you want to get started?
Yeah, I'll say we do have every year we have a corporate giving award and that we give, and it's a big banquet, and we put a big ask for nominations out and recognize corporations that have been giving across Arkansas, whether it's through us or not. And so and we've been doing that for 15 years now. And so we were almost to the point where we're like, okay, guys, we're running out of people to recognize. And so we kind of had to mix it up a little bit this year to do kind of we did kind of like a throwback of, who all we've recognized, and use that to really highlight corporate giving in Arkansas. So I think that's been a really good way for us to highlight organizations, not just that give with us, but to highlight the importance of corporate giving and forge relationships with corporations that we probably wouldn't have connected with before had they not been nominated through, through the state chamber or a different organization. And I'll say that it's ranged from the small brewery down the street to like these, huge corporate giving. And I think we have in the past, we've done different levels of recognition. So I think that's worked really well for us in terms of thanking folks. But, anytime anybody, is giving to the foundation, any opportunity we get to thank them, whether it's through signage or logos or a radio spot or, however we can get the word out that this match was in large part thanks to blah, 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 Inc. or LLC, we always do that.
Kim, do you have any corporate giving?
Yes, we do. We have local companies, and most of them are very small. We don't have any large employers around here, mainly restaurants and flooring stores and realtors. But we do acknowledge those that do donate to the community foundation, and we take an ad out every year listing all our corporate sponsors in the local paper. And we rotate monthly a different corporate sponsor on our Facebook page. So those are the main ways that we acknowledge them.
Great. We don't have a real strong focus on corporates, but in the arena of some of the smaller businesses, one of the things that we've tried to do is we've got a few that we work with on their corporate giving. And especially we've got one that's been a really exciting success story. They've been really thoughtful, and probably they're big enough that they were able to put quite a bit of planning time and staff engagement time into making this happen. So it's definitely not for a real tiny micro enterprise, but what was great about it is that it gave us the chance to really celebrate the emphasis that they were playing on being an incredibly powerful and thoughtful corporate citizen in the community. And so the way we talk about it is just being able to tell their story. And obviously it's through supporting the community foundation, but we're shining the spotlight on them in a really exciting way that kind of adds more dimension and more humanity to a business. So I think that's I think that can scale even at a larger corporate level. Jim?
Yeah, one other thing that I'll add on that, and this is probably more applicable at the smaller business level and the corporate level, is that so one project that we did that I didn't talk about here was on corporate or business giving, or corporate social responsibility, or whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that came out of that study, which actually surprised the owner of the small business, was he actually made a profit on it. So we arranged, we did it was a mini experiment embedded within a toy store in Anchorage. It was Classic Toys for these guys who are in Anchorage. And every Christmas they do a Toys for Tots campaign. And what they used to do was tell customers that came in that if you bought a toy and donated Toys for Tots, you get 20% off. And no one ever took advantage of it because if you're buying an expensive toy, 20% off, it's still like it just wasn't working. So what we did is we ran a program. Their average sale was about $40 in Christmas time. And we picked that number because what we said was, look, anyone who makes a purchase where the total purchase is above $40 will donate $2 to Toys for Tots. And what that actually did was nudged. There's already people who are going to spend more than $40 because they were already coming and spend more than $40. But we can document that there was a large number of people who basically shifted from the $30-something range to $41 to get to that, to cross that threshold. And the volume of sales that they had that kind of nudged that nudge effect actually increased their sales. And so the owner of the business was actually able to trace it back and say it actually looked like, even though he had to give some of that money away because he was doing the match, the increase in sales actually more than made up for it. And so it was kind of a win-win. Toys for Tots wound up with a couple $1,000s in donations. His worst case scenario was that he broke even, and it looks like he broke even to maybe made a few dollars on it. And it's not so much to say like, hey, here's a way for you to get rich and make money, but some of these like matching type programs with local businesses can at least affect their sales. And this is on a one-time basis. It's quite possible that there's also like, oh wow, I really like this business now because they're actually engaged in Toys for Tots, and I feel good about them. I'm going to support the local business because they do more for the community than the Walmart does, for example. And so my point here is just to point out that some of those engagements with local business, especially with local businesses, can actually wind up being win-win in the sense that they're not just giving away a percentage of their sales. Their sales might actually go up because of the promotions.
And I don't want to get tread on Jim's area, which is data, and mine is not. But I do think too that we know that the younger generation is much more interested in connecting their values to where their dollars go overall. And so to the extent that you can find aligned businesses who want to support the community foundation and its work, that can be its own endorsement to those donors, and it can also be a way to engage those donors. I also want to just go back for a moment to our conversation about COVID. And I think in our community, and I imagine in all of yours, that while there were some things that were new in terms of community needs and challenges, that for the most part, what's happened is all of the things that weren't working were just amplified and exacerbated. And so one of the things that I think is really helpful to think about, I know that in Alaska, in Arkansas, you've got Aspire Arkansas. And I don't know if that's based on the community health assessment. It sounds like it's actually separate commissioned research. I'm not sure about that. But I wanted to just encourage that folks look at the opportunity to use that kind of data as a way to help illuminate a lot of and back up a lot of the anecdotal stories that people have around not only COVID, but just even in recovery, the needs and the opportunities that exist in community. And that in and of itself can create a lot of partnership opportunities with the nonprofit sector, with the business community, with government at all levels. So when we think about partnerships and what can be different going forward, I think that's very fertile ground for everybody to look at. And thank you, Mariko. So the Aspire Arkansas link is in the chat, so you can peruse it at your leisure. So I know we're getting pretty close to time. I did want to also mention, I'm going to send my slides, and I'm not sharing some of them, but I'll send those afterwards so that folks can get them. But I also want to mention Project Neighborly, which is something that we launched on Election Day in 2016. The whole idea was that we wanted to be clear that it didn't matter who won. We knew that there were a lot of people that weren't talking to a lot of other people, and that was not going to work in our community. And so the whole idea was to not only engage the nonprofit community, but also to get all the way to just people walking around on the street and invite them to think about how to get a little more curious about their neighbors so that we could start to kind of reweave that fabric of community that that got pretty frayed and is still pretty challenged. So I'll share more about that. And the reason I bring it up is that we had a live grant round, just put a bunch of grants out in the community right before COVID hit. And then of course, not surprisingly, as you can imagine with a grant program like that, a lot of it was based on events, people planning to bring folks together. And we immediately just said, hey, if you think you can do the program and you want to do it later, great. If you can imagine a way to make it work during a pandemic, fantastic, and let us know how you do that. And if you want to just keep the money and use it for something else that's in order to respond to COVID or just support your organization, that's fine too. But we're really excited to see how that comes back. We also shared the whole kind of process and protocol with the Idaho Community Foundation because they were finding the same thing, and they're early on in their process. They just started kind of rolling it out, I think. So I haven't heard anything yet about how that's going, but we'll share some more information about that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know that this is going to be of interest to everybody, but we have a youth philanthropy program. So this is kind of the next gen. But one of the things that I think is really exciting about it is, first of all, I think as most folks know, as soon as you start hearing from some of the high school students right now, they're amazing. They're ridiculously beyond certainly where I was in high school. And not only do we get them thinking about their community in a very different way at a really young age, but, and this goes back to Jim's comment early on about setting patterns and setting expectations and creating exposure to new ideas and a new sense of kind of responsibility and opportunity to be a part of your community. But we also have an opportunity then to engage their parents. And we hear from people whose kids have gone through the program, and we allow kids to go through multiple years while they're in high school. And it is just really remarkable. So we actually contract with somebody to do the program because we don't have the staff resources to do it, but it's our board members' favorite meeting of the year. They love hearing from the students and the process they went through and what they learned and the questions that they ask of the grantees. So happy to share more about that as well. So as we wind down, I want to invite folks to pop any questions in the chat and also ask just our panelists what's kind of stuck with you and what else do you want to make sure the group hears before we sign off for the evening. Lauren, do you want to get us started?
I will. I think my big takeaway from listening to all of this is that I do love data, but I also love, more than data, messy real life and what it looks like. And so I think my big takeaway is to balance myself a little bit more because I tend to lean more toward what I see and the anecdotes. And I really like Jim's systematic approach. And so I got to find a happy medium in between there. So I really like this idea of balance and living in both worlds.
Excellent, thank you. Kim, how about you?
I came away with some good ideas to to noodle around and approach my board with. So that's absolutely wonderful, especially taking different approaches and doing the experiment that Jim talked about, and maybe engaging our business sponsors in a different way. Those are two of the big ones.
Great. And Jim, we'll give you the final word.
I get to bookend everything, huh? Okay, following what Lauren said, I love, yes, getting data and trying to, be really systematic about it. But we also cherry pick our studies too, because a lot of times the opportunities aren't there because the campaign is going too fast. There's not enough time, or there's not enough resources, or like with one of the nonprofits in Anchorage, they just don't have enough donors for us to be able to say, oh, this worked more than the other one. Because if you're only bringing in 50 donations, there's just not a lot that you can do with it. And so I don't want to be dismissive of the anecdotes, because yeah, it's helpful to get some data behind things. And a lot of times, we do these studies and we're like, yep, your anecdotes were right. But sometimes they're not. And so it's helpful to be able to generate it. For Kim, sometimes I'm going to say I run experiments. Sometimes those experiments can be handy. If you have somebody who's skeptical, if you're convinced that something's going to work, then the experiments can be a way to advance the conversation. It's not necessarily prove you're right. It may actually turn out to show that maybe your board was right, and you're like, oh, okay, then it gives you direction. And the other thing that I would just say is that, a lot of the academic research on this is not rocket science. I mean, if you take a look at the presentation that I showed to you guys, there is some higher end statistics behind it to tease out some of the results, but at a very intuitive level, it wasn't very hard. We sent out a couple of different postcards to a couple of different groups. The key was that we randomized. People aren't very good at randomization. If you do any trials, you definitely want to randomize people into different groups. And so it's not hard to do. But the other bit about it is that there is a lot of research out there that's very accessible. It's not really dense things that you need advanced degrees to understand. It's the kind of stuff that people like yourselves could very much relate to and would benefit from. And so, if people have questions and try to figure out where do you go to find some of this literature, I mean, I'm happy to point people in directions. I mean, it's all over the place in different journals, but there are a lot of good resources that are out there that might have some ideas for how to advance fundraising campaigns.
Great, thank you. Jim, would you be willing to put a short little recommended reading list together for folks?
Yeah, it will take me some time to do it because I'm on the road right now, but when I get back, I will put it together and then pass that along if you want to distribute it maybe in a week or so.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, terrific. So yeah, I guess what I would leave folks with is that I hope you feel inspired and hopeful after this. I certainly learned a lot and got a lot of great information and ideas. And I think if you are going back to your board conversations with the notion that you want to ask, why do we do it this way? Or I wonder what so-and-so thinks. Or what if we just tried something? Those are probably really good ways, especially when we're kind of coming out of this head down, keep it going, one foot in front of the other time period, to a time when we hope that things are going to lighten up a little bit and we can get back to trying to be more aspirational and out of survival mode. So I want to thank, again, Lauren and Kim for staying up for me, what would be my bedtime by now if I was in Arkansas, and for all of your great insights, and really appreciated having Tim here. And then Jim, I feel like you are here with like in the middle of your own. I'm glad I used the James Bond reference because I feel like you're in some kind of spy quarters. So that's the story I'm going to keep telling myself. And I know everybody wants your cell number so they can ask you all these data questions going forward. And with that, I will turn it back to Mariko, and thank you all for being with us this afternoon, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maury, for facilitating this session for us. And again, a big thank you to all of our speakers, Jim, Tim, Lauren, and Kim. And Carmen, did you want to share a quick reminder for us before we end the session?
Sure. So I'm getting ready for the awards party, which starts at 5:15. So on this same Zoom link, Put your bling on, your wacky hat, your sunglasses. If you have a crown or a tiara, please wear it. We're gonna have some fun, some live music, and pass out some awards. So please join us at 5:15. Thank you.